New Jersey Future has been around since 1987. We're a nonprofit, non-governmental, non-governmental organization that has been advocating smarter land use and growth policies. We were formed when a group of folks from the corporate sector and the environmental organizations came together, and they said that in New Jersey we really need to start thinking about better land use patterns. And since 1987 we've become a pretty strong voice in anti-sprawl policies and programs and redevelopment, sort of creating a balance between open space preservation, redevelopment, and better land use patterns. Just about in July of 2012, our board came together and they said, we really need to start planning a new direction. Advocacy is really great, but what we'd like to do is start to get into direct assistance to municipalities. And then a couple months later, Sandy hit, and they were presented with an opportunity that they could never have imagined that they would get into. FEMA and MERC approached us the day after Sandy hit, and they said, you've got to create this position of local recovery planning manager. FEMA was seeking a partner for their local recovery efforts. And this local recovery planning manager program was something that they had developed through their National Disaster Recovery Framework. They identified through the years of disasters that they had wrestled through that, and this has already been said a couple times before, that the biggest gap that exists in encouraging or promoting or fomenting recovery is the lack of municipal capacity to be able to carry projects out. Communities were just completely caught off guard, and you could imagine that they would be with the damage and the devastation that occurred after Sandy. And FEMA saw that this position was going to be could be instrumental in helping the communities develop the wherewithal to be able to handle those problems. At the same time, the New Jersey Recovery Fund was created by 26 philanthropic organizations, some of the biggest in the country, came together and they said, we want to transition from recovery or emergency response to recovery and mitigation. And so they formed this fund, and they decided to provide funding to some 60 different partners to help communities wrestle with recovery needs. And they created funding categories, as you can see here, in arts, environmental public policy, public information, and most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, it's the stuff that we're doing, the community planning and capacity building. This is, again, FEMA felt that this local recovery planning manager position was so important. It is prominently included in their National Disaster Recovery Framework, and I believe, and they believe, that this is a model for how disaster recovery needs to occur throughout the country. It really provides the linchpin, the gap filler, in order to help municipalities transition. And everything, how many here are from home rule states? Almost everybody? No? Just a couple? Local government drives land use policy. Local government makes all decisions about land use and development. Local government is where recovery occurs. And without that capability, local government is totally incapable of handling the issues that they're wrestling with, which is why this position is so important. But let me talk to you a little bit about what the Local Recovery Planning Manager Program does. We started out by establishing a set of screening criteria. There were some 130 communities in New Jersey that were affected by Sandy, all up and down all coasts of the state. We tried to, recognizing that we had limited resources, the Local Recovery Planning Manager Program, the funding we received from MERC and the New Jersey Recovery Fund, allowed us to create 4 local recovery planning manager positions. They are all occupied by seasoned planners, but recognizing that there are only 4 with 130 communities that have need, we needed to create some way of filtering out and focusing where we would be able to provide our services. So we chose these three criteria as the major sort of screens that we would apply in looking at communities. The first is that the communities would have sustained considerable storm damage, and which ones didn't. That there was limited or no in-house planning capacity, and that narrowed the field. And that the communities were primarily full-time residents. In New Jersey, about the population of the shore, or the population of the shore increases during the season by about 68%. So there are a lot of only part-time communities that occupy the shore. So again, these screens helped us to filter down. And we also were looking to assist communities that had significant populations of lower income people, populations that were socially or at risk. We ended up going into a couple of the first communities that we talked to, and we ended up throwing the criteria out because almost every community that we walked into said, we really need you to start, and we really need you to start today. So it turned out that the first 7 communities that we talked to are the ones that we're working with. Best laid plans, right? I'm a planner. So these are the folks who we're working with. There's 7 communities in 3 different counties in the state, and they represent distinctly different characters of communities too. And the point of that is that they create models for us so that when we establish what we're doing, and if we're able to determine whether what we're doing is actually successful, we believe that we're going to be able to create models for how this is done in those other communities that have just as significant a need. So we're working in 2 communities in Monmouth County, sort of on the Raritan Bay, near Sandy Hook. I'm not familiar with these areas, so maybe I shouldn't get into this. But Highlands, Seabright, 2 shoreline communities. Tuckerton and Little Egg Harbor Township are sort of within a bay area. And then on the Delaware Bay portion of the state, we're working in 3 communities, Morris River, Commercial, and Down Townships. These communities are in a very, very sparsely settled area. This is sort of, they're perceived as the part of the state that's forgotten. It's a very sparsely settled area. It's very pristine. It's gorgeous. If you go down there, there's just this wonderful natural area. There are fishing industries down there, shellfish industries that have supported the region for decades, centuries. And they were all severely damaged by the storm. They're on most of the activity that occurs within those Delaware Bay Shore communities are on rivers, and the rivers were all silted in as a result of Sandy. As a matter of fact, the docks where the boats are moored, during the day, right now they're about 2 hours during the day that the boats can get in and out to be able to do the fishing to support the economic base of the community. So there's significant issues that all these communities are facing. And let me give you a little bit more detail on what those issues are. This is Down Township. This is one of those Delaware Bay Shore communities. In Down Township, they're losing an acre of marshland to sea level rise a day. An acre a day. That rate is staggering. They have been offered buyout money by the state. The state has said, look, we'll help you out. We recognize that you've experienced some damages. We'll offer to buy out your properties. What they've told the state is take your buyout money and let us use it for something else. Because our communities are disappearing. We don't want to be bought out. We want to be rebuilt. We want to be renewed. So they're afraid that they're going to disappear. As a matter of fact, they created bumper stickers that said no retreat. We are working with Rutgers University. We're working with several partners. The baseline of analysis when we're walking into a community, we decided the most important thing we could start out with is to do a vulnerability analysis in every one of the communities that we're working with. This is not, by the way, a requirement of the state. This is a requirement that we're imposing because we believe that if you don't look at the vulnerability of communities before you start to develop what the project should be, then you're really going to be throwing potentially your money down the tubes. So as part of the vulnerability analysis, Rutgers is doing sea level rise mapping for us. And I hope you can see this transition because, for one thing, I haven't shown this to anyone yet. We just got these maps and this is sort of a sneak preview. The communities don't know about this yet. They will shortly. But this is sea level rise by 2050. This is a 1 to 3 foot sea level rise that's anticipated in New Jersey. New Jersey, as was mentioned earlier, not only is experiencing pretty rapid sea level rise, but the shoreline is also subsiding. And sea level rise and subsidence is happening faster in New Jersey than it is happening anywhere on the East Coast. This is a pretty significant issue that this community is wrestling with. This is Little Egg Harbor Township. Little Egg Harbor Township has these two communities. I don't know if this has does this have a laser pointer? It doesn't matter. I'll point it out. Down here, there's Mystic Island and Osborne Island, two residential enclaves that have been there forever. If you go down there, it's like little Florida communities. There are all these little sort of waterways. They're right in the back of all the houses. And the boats, their boats kind of dock up against right in the backyard. Osborne Island is much better off than is Mystic Island. Mystic Island is sort of like working class, lower income. Community in Osborne is a little more elevated in its income capability. Anyway, all of them have some level of second family homes, as well as a mix of year-round housing and full-time or primary housing. What's happening there is that as a result of the storm, and as a result of the changes in the insurance policies, the residents in these areas are being forced to determine whether or not, well, a lot of them will no longer have economic value in their houses. So a lot of them are trying to decide whether they elevate, whether they rebuild, or whether they walk away. And a lot of people in this town are walking away. And what that means is that the houses are just being left to become moldy health hazards for the neighbors in the community as well. And on top of that, this is what they're going to look like by 2050. Significant loss of area. I mean, this is Tuckerton. This is all developed here right now with small, really pleasant little houses. I mean, it's a lovely little village. Same thing with Osborne. With Mystic Island, which is around here, and this is Osborne Island. And you can see from that shot that there's still some bit of Osborne Island that's still going to be above the water level in 2050. But the problem is you'll have to take a boat to get there to the shore. So this is Highlands coming on as my phantom. Highlands is a really interesting community. It is primarily working class. When Sandy hit, there was tremendous devastation. I mean, in all of these communities, there was tremendous devastation. But Highlands has this really, you can't see it because it's impossible, but there's a ridge that kind of runs along here, and it goes up about 50 feet. And this area is all at sea level. And there was a trailer home here that was completely destroyed. Several of the houses, buildings throughout the community were completely ripped apart. The community is wrestling with the recovery slowly, and it has all kinds of. Very interestingly, it has one of the biggest issues is dealing with the inflow and infiltration in its sewer system. Had a sewer system problem. I mean, every community, virtually every community, older community suffers from inflow and infiltration issues, right? I mean, stormwater leaks in, sewer systems tend to be leaky, and what that tends to do is consume the capacity of the sewer treatment system. So there was this problem that was occurring before the storm, but after the storm hit, the storm so badly damaged the sewer system that over 50% of the sewage that is being piped to the treatment plant from Highlands is now stormwater. And what they've done is they've exceeded their capacity to send any more water, any additional volumes of water to be treated. And what that means is that they can't issue permits for redevelopment. Essentially, they are frozen in place until they deal with this problem. They can go no further with redevelopment as a result of that. It's millions of dollars to fix the problem. This is a really small community. I think the population, well, I know the population is 5,000. I mean, it's a very little community. Again, working class, having really tough times. And after, hitting all the buttons here, after sea level rise, this is the primary commercial corridor and residential area in the community. It's going to be completely inundated. Seabright, another one of our communities, is this really interesting barrier community island, a good illustration of, you know, the barrier islands line run parallel to the entire coast of or virtually the entire coast of New Jersey. Seabright was one of the most heavily hit and most damaged communities after Sandy. 50% of the structures in the municipality were completely destroyed after the storm. 50% of the municipality's population was relocated. It's got 1,400 people as its population. 400 to 500 families are still out of the houses today in that community. You walk down the streets of this community, you go into the community, they did a wonderful job cleaning up. Every community in New Jersey did a really great job removing the debris. It's sort of, psychologically, they needed to remove it quickly to be able to feel comfortable that they could actually overcome the damage that they were facing. They did a great job in doing that in Seabright. They spent their entire annual budget removing the debris for this town. You walk down the streets today, you look in the windows, the streets look great, but the houses are stripped to the studs still. I mean, they're just, and the insurance payments issue, it's tremendous. I happened to have been walking around when we went around with the Rebuild by Design teams, just going through the communities, and I was captured by one of the residents there, and she told me a year after the storm, she was finally getting an insurance payment. A year after the storm. Monmouth University in New Jersey did a recent survey. As late as September of this year, they said that as many as 60,000 households in New Jersey could still be out of their homes. 60,000 people. I'm sorry, 60,000 households. Now, on their own, it would be impossible for a local official to begin to contend with these issues. I don't know of any local official in the world that would want to bring these issues up with the community that they're living in. It's virtually an impossible issue to wrestle with by themselves. So the question then is, who should be in the position to start to deal with these issues? Certainly not the private sector. That's not their game. That's not what they do. And justifiably, their focus is on economic return. You can't turn to them to try and look at risk and try and change their development patterns. But the and they'll do whatever municipalities say they can do by the regulations. I contend, I argue, I'd like to change. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do sea level rise. Sea level rise, this is interesting. In Seabright, here's Seabright. This is the major roadway that is the spine that runs north and south. Seabright is a half-mile wide and 4 miles long. Okay, they get flooded from there's the Shrewsbury River on the west and the Atlantic Ocean on the east. They get flooded both ways all the time. Sea level rise. This is their major commercial residential area. With sea level rise, it's completely gone. The question is, should these communities be here in the first place? The answer is they are. That's not the way to deal with this. So I would argue that the states are in the best position to begin to deal with these kinds of issues on behalf of municipalities, to help them, to give them some level of cover, and to start working effectively to wrestle with these issues. And the reasons are many-fold, but let me just give you a couple. First of all, HMGP, Hazard Mitigation Grant funding, as was mentioned, that's provided through the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, funnels all assistance through the states. And they also need to develop a statewide hazard mitigation plan, and they can require that all municipalities have corresponding plans or plans that sort of fit in with the state's program. States are also the primary conduit for CDBG funds, and they also must develop an administrative plan to which they establish who gets money and how they get money and what they get money for. So states exercise considerable latitude in prioritizing which jurisdictions receive money and for what purposes. And then also states are in the best position to advocate for a regional context, particularly where vulnerable resources cross jurisdictions. And not only that, states can set common standards that municipalities would have to develop to. There are several different models for sea level rise. States can be the arbiter for what levels or what models need to be applied and how. And certainly not allow individual municipalities to go about setting those standards themselves. That's a recipe for chaos. It's what's happening right now, but it is not the way to go. And what states should start that process? According to a study by NOAA in 2013, that they released in 2013, but in 2010, 40% of the population of the United States lived in coastal communities. By 2020, we're exercising lemming kinds of tendencies. By 2020, 50% of the population of the United States will live in shoreline communities. Yet science tells us that these are the very places that are most vulnerable to sea level rise, and you saw the maps that I showed you. It's pretty evident. States can play a significant role in getting communities to start to rethink the way that they develop. And there are three functions that states already serve or exercise that should be focused on risk, but it wouldn't extend beyond their level of comfort, including and starting with planning. States can be instrumental in improving hazard mitigation plans. All counties in New Jersey, after the adoption of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, started to develop their hazard mitigation plans because they wouldn't receive money unless they had plans in place. But they let the Office of Emergency Management drive the plans. And I don't know how it happens in your states, but the Office of Emergency Management, as we talked about before, is sort of an after, their perspective is always after the disaster has occurred. Mitigation, by definition, is minimizing and avoiding potential future impacts of a particular event. We really need to make hazard mitigation planning a planning process. In the 20 counties plans that I read in New Jersey, the planning departments were not involved in the process. They were at times invited to participate in the discussions, but they did not drive it. Planners need to develop these plans. And they need to be based on vulnerabilities. States also have extensive purview in regulation. They can require that municipalities conduct vulnerability assessments, and then they can ensure that vulnerability assessments are integrated into local plans, regulations, and capital investments. They can remove standards that might inadvertently put people in harm's way. In New Jersey, we have the CAFRA laws, Coastal Facility Review Act. It's designed to protect the environmental areas of the state, but what it does is allow houses that have already been constructed to be rebuilt again and again and again after a storm. What we need to do is look at our regulations and strip out inadvertent provisions that might put people in harm's way. And then finally, with spending, there are several things that states can do. They can fund local recovery planning managers. I know it's what I do, but I really do believe that it is the thing that municipalities need. By the way, our local recovery managers are working with municipalities directly, assisting them to plan, manage, and implement strategies, and they will be in the towns for up to 18 months, and we're hoping for funding that will get them there for 3 years. I think that that's a baseline term for really effectively developing the relationships that they're going to have to build to get municipalities to feel comfortable with them. But they are doing it on a day-to-day basis. They are holding their hands through the process. And hopefully when they are done, they will leave them with the capability that they'll need to be able to do these activities moving forward. States can provide adequate funding for municipal risk-based mitigation planning. We've already talked about that. State capital investments can be based on risk, and their investments are based on vulnerability, and they can require local governments to do the same. States can also establish statewide resiliency, performance, and design standards. And finally, and it's probably not finally, but it's on my list, they could focus buyout strategies in the areas that are most vulnerable. Right now in New Jersey, our buyout program is entirely on a voluntary basis. We try and concentrate where the buyouts occur, but allowing a voluntary basis to drive your buyout strategy does not suggest that you're dealing with the areas that are most affected. And there are other strategies as well that states can promote, like transfer of development rights to allow for development to move out of areas of risk, and life rights programs that allow for people currently living in a structure, once they're gone, not to have that structure reoccupied, but to pay them and allow that structure to be returned to a natural area. There are several different strategies that states can promote. And there are several states that are doing it, and I've already talked too long, so I'm not gonna spend any more time. Maryland is a great example of a state that's doing some wonderful stuff. They're developing design guidelines, they're doing self-assessment tools, they're really working with their communities. Delaware is another one that's done some incredible work in building plans and getting a committee together to work with municipalities to ensure that their residents and their businesses are dealing with risk, and they're able to, and local governments, that they're responding to risk. And New York Rising, of course, is doing a great job as well. They've developed a step-by-step guide. Anyway, you can look those things up. They're all online. They're great tools. Wait a minute, I don't want to miss this. Rising sea levels, rapid and more frequent storms of greater intensity and severity sort of make it abundantly clear that we need to fundamentally rethink our land use patterns to deal with vulnerability. Sandy was not the first storm that these communities had experienced. Sandy just exacerbated problems that they've been experiencing for the past 30 years. In New Jersey, over the last 9 years, we've had 11 storms that have been declared presidential disasters. How many wake-up calls do you have to have before you finally do? States can set the tone and the direction of the conversation. They can foster and promote interjurisdictional partnerships that will be essential to help residents grapple with the significant future challenges that climate change presents. And given the risk potential and the vulnerability of the shore communities, I don't think it's an option anymore. I really think it's an obligation that states start wrestling with these problems. And I leave you with an inside New Jersey joke, but thank you very much.